today. We are going into our final panel now, and then I hope you're all able to stay for a drink after 2, which is going to run from the end of this session, and it's in partnership with our friends Magnite. So a big thanks to them for keeping us all watered and merry in the Christmas spirit. Final session today is all about improving targeting inputs, outputs, and impact, and it's going to be covering everything from how addressable TV can be used to generate demand among more relevant audiences, as well as best uses of data and much more. The moderator for this panel is McKee. He's the Executive Vice President and General Manager for FreeWheel. I'll let Mark introduce his panel. There's some awesome speakers lined up for this one, so I'm looking forward to it. And afterwards, I hope you can join us for a drink. Please do come say hello and let me know what you thought about the day. It'd be great to hear from you. So without further ado, please welcome to the stage McKee and his panel.
Sounds like I'm a troop. We will, well, thank you first and foremost for joining us. The other part of this is we have a very robust conversation that I know is, the next part of this is the end of the conference, networking, drinking. So we'll make sure we stay on time. It will be a really good presentation. We've spoken a lot about data today. Almost in every single conversation, the concept of data, identity, and addressability comes up. Today, we're going to have this esteemed panel talk about it from both the buy and sell sides, what it takes, the inputs, outputs, and impact for brands, for publishers, and so we'll go through that. But before we do that, I'm just going to have everyone make sure that we're on the same page for what does addressable TV mean, because in this conversation, in this conference today, I've heard a lot of different definitions. So we're all on the same page. Everyone will go through, say a little bit about themselves, and then their definition of addressability. I'm McKee. I oversee FreeWheel, so very excited to be here. First time actually at this conference in London, so it's a pretty tremendous event. I'm very impressed. So with that, why don't we start with you?
Thank you. So hi everyone, I'm Emma. I'm Head of Channel Planning at Wavemaker, so I'm responsible for ensuring that whilst the world of media is evolving, content's changing, technology is evolving, that our strategies show up through craft planning in channels and across channels. That's who I am and what I do day to day. In terms of what do we mean by addressable, the way I see it is kind of a two-pronged thing. So first of all, there's the data and the technology that we can use for identifying audiences. So there's that lens about how we find the people that we want to talk to. And the second part is a creative lens. So when we found them, how do we show up? How do we personalize messages? So it's kind of double-sided point of view of what we might mean by addressable.
Great.
My name is Toria Anderson. I am the controller of addressable and converged operations for ITV. And absolutely agree with everything you've just said. My specific lens on it is focused far more on the capabilities and how we make sure that more of our inventory can be used to target either by specific devices, specific people.
Great.
My name is Alexander von Woikowsky. I come from Germany, so I'm trying to give a little bit of an angle of like what happens in the German market. We have this issue of being a little bit more regulated. I work for a company called Goldbach, that's a sales house. We do represent exclusive inventories in the CTV and the online and the TV business. We also do programmatic, and and then on the anchor, I think what is said about addressable is what I relate to. What I struggled when the question came up in the prep of this conversation. It's like, okay, how do I define TV in this set? And it's like, what is considered TV nowadays? Because we're talking about the linear piece of TV with like someone like ITV in the UK. But is it Netflix as well? Is it a fast channel as well when we talk about addressable? And probably we'll talk about this later in this panel. But this was the one I was struggling, apart from like what you said, obviously it's about personalized and very user-centric campaigns. But the TV bit is the one that I'm interested about, and see what we go with that one.
That could be a panel on its own.
Yeah, I agree.
I love that. I'm Charlotte Dexter-Jones. I'm a business director at Mindshare. I actually sit within a team that's called Live Planning. So my role actually focuses on kind of measurement, transformation, and innovation across channel. So not just specifically from a TV lens, but across all different channels as well. And I think, that's part and parcel as well, the kind of question of what is the TV element of addressable. We have a lot of addressability in other channels within digital. But I think to echo what everyone else has already said, it's obviously just focusing on that data signal and how we can use that to really personalise our ads.
I'm Charlie Makin. I co-founded Be Addressable earlier, about 6 months ago.
You do addressability.
We're quite keen on it. And we're an agency and consultancy. An agency, we create a lot of campaigns, and we have done for many years within our previous lives, that are addressable, and we've won Thinkbox Awards and stuff. But also acting as a consultancy, helping clients, and in certain cases agencies, think about what addressable will be and how it's... Because our view is it's the beginning of a revolution in the UK. And it's not so much a technology, it's a strategy, I think, that it's about how we can distribute specifically tailored content to identified groups of consumers, if we can, using first-party data. And the implications of that, and we see this all the time, are huge. That, you know, for example, the creative industry is usually set up to create one ad in a 3-month period, where you've got to create multiple executions that may only run for 2 or 3 days. And we've got to be able to build that and change everything about how people think and operate.
I love it. I mean, so let's talk about, we'll just jump right in. The first question, I'm going to throw it to Alex. So I'm going to give you a little 5-second head start.
What I said, right?
5-second head start, but we talk about the future being addressable.
Yeah.
The future is here. We just talked a little bit about undefining this concept of TV.
Yes.
So for the purpose of this question, it is multi-screen TV.
Yes.
One of the most basic aspects of that is, how do we just track the audiences that we go after and try to target? You know, can you just talk a little bit about where are the biggest hurdles, especially in your seat from a publisher perspective? You know, brands are expecting that to take shape.
Well, in a short answer, it's data, right? I mean, we need the data from the customers, and this is the tricky piece, specifically talking about it from a German perspective. The people, they literally give all their lives out to Amazon, you know, the credit card debt and everything, but when it comes to giving you confirmation about using data in the advertising, they're very reluctant to do it. And so this is the one piece. And then the second piece is you have local players coming along with international players. If you talk to someone like Samsung or Netflix, they're not very keen on sharing what they have in terms of their data. So I think we need to build some common grounds. You have to build some, maybe like say, data warehouses where you could bring the data in, where it's anonymized, and then you can use it in terms of bringing it and add value to the advertising business. But it's a tricky piece, again, like relating to what you just said. I mean, this is going to be the future, and I think the future's already there. If you add like everything that's happening with machine learning, with the usage of AI, you know, how you can create value with data, it's going to be an amazing opportunity to raise the CPMs and to raise the value of the campaigns in terms of the ROIs that we're going to create. But I think, you know, the core piece, the heart of it, is to build a data set that relates across all the different platforms that we apply. And I like your multi-screen kind of definition, because it goes away from TV. It goes into like video content in general, I would say.
I mean, certainly from a buy-side perspective, so Emma or Charlotte, when we look at this, you have a lot of work to do. You know, it's one thing on one side where you're buying addressability from, or one publisher or programmer is giving you the ability to be targeted, but scale matters. And you're doing it across all, single audience, multiple placements. What's most important as we think about that for your brands, and what are being asked of you as stewards of their investment?
Good question, and it is difficult.
Yes.
As you say, even just within one ecosystem, it's a challenge. Joining up different ecosystems is a further challenge. So the sorts of questions I think the primary question that we challenge our clients with is, how do we measure success? And making sure that if we can get the right data, how do we then follow that through to their business and determine what is and what isn't working? Is it worth paying higher premiums, potentially? That will depend on the business outcomes. So when we're speaking to clients, I think the number one thing that we're trying to establish is ensuring that we've got the right measurement framework in place in order to be able to understand, you know, the benefits of being potentially more targeted or serving a more personalised message to someone. That's the key thing. And then, I guess, from a media metrics perspective, understanding reach and frequency is pretty important. That's a whole world of, I'm sure that's been discussed a lot today, but a whole world of challenges within itself, with lots of different people playing in that space. but no single solution at the moment across all screens and all devices and all platforms. So, we have ways of working around that, but that's ultimately a really big challenge because we want to make sure that we're reaching the right people the right number of times with the right frequency.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think, Charlotte, from your perspective, you sit in a place where you're often tasked by your peers. I have this problem, figure it out.
Yeah.
So reach and frequency, I think, is a really great, I mean, let's just start with that, because while it sounds easy, we talk about it a lot, it's far from simple.
Yeah, definitely. I think with the reach and frequency point, that's something that the client is wanting to be able to establish quite early on. As you said, like a measure of success. It's who have I reached and where have I reached them, but also where's that deduplicated reach. I want to make sure that, you know, I am reaching them as many people as possible and having that uniqueness. And I think that's where we're struggling, where there isn't a solution in market necessarily at the moment to be able to do that across all channels. There are ways that we can start to work around that. And I think, you know, there are measurement partners that we can use post a campaign, but I think planning for the reach and frequency cross-channel where you're using, you know, lots of different partners, because I guess if you're activating on addressable TV, you're not necessarily just running with one broadcaster, you're having the whole mix in there. So I think that's something that maybe as an industry we're still needing to find that one solution. I think, as I say, post-campaign, there's the capability for, you know, audio pitch shifts so that you can then look at incremental reach post having run your ads, but there's not quite that solution there yet to be able to plan for it. And I think that's kind of where our clients are kind of pushing us more into wanting to be able to understand how can I plan ahead to make sure that I'm reaching as many people as possible rather than just looking at retrospectively, what have I done?
Yep.
Can I add another question to that?
Please.
I would be really curious to hear, beyond, you said measuring success, but do you also measure the uplift that it creates in terms of like the success that was there before? And what's the KPI for it?
Yeah, I mean, I think it depends. Like when it comes to, if we're looking at addressable TV, a lot of what we've been doing recently is focused on retailer segments. So that's then focusing on incrementality of sales, which is also quite an interesting concept because I think a lot of the time you would see TV and addressable TV as an upper funnel activation. And therefore, when you're starting to look at integrating retail media and we're starting to look at sales, where does TV then sit in our ecosystem? So I think it's dependent on what the client is looking at. But I guess at the end of the day, every client wants to sell their product. So if we can see the incrementality of sales, there's a benefit to them. But how does that then fit with where TV sits in our ecosystem?
Yep.
Yeah, and I think we'll talk a little bit about that because when you need scale. So I'm going to go to you as controller of addressability. But I think ITV has scale. It certainly has scale on a multi-screen perspective. How are you not charging costs, how are you kind of charged with solving this problem for, you know, brands and agencies?
Yeah, well, I think one of the really interesting things for me is that we talk about addressability as being the future. I don't think that that means that necessarily we're going to be using this high fidelity, really super personalised targeting on every campaign or on every, you know, impact and impression in future. For us, the future is a mixed economy. Like, we still need these mass simultaneous reach moments.
Got to feed the funnel.
Yeah, exactly. But also, like, different brands need different things from us. You know, we look at the impact of something. I'm a Celebrity, it's just finished. Very UK reference, Mark, sorry. But, you know, the audience for that, whilst everyone says linear TV is declining, it's held steady year over year. And there are brands that know that that will drive what they need from them if they're in the final or if they're in the first episode. That's not something that I ever think we'll want to split up and carve out and start looking at actually how do we hyper-personalise these moments. But that's not to say that we don't want the optionality of the capability that any impression could be addressable, but it's on us with our agency partners, with our advertiser partners, to make sensible decisions about where we actually want to leverage addressability and to what extent.
I love it. I mean, Charlie, if you're a consultant, you have to be looking at it from a perspective of there are challenges.
Well, I think there are two elements which are important. We've got a non-exec director who's just joined us called Helen Jeremiah, who was CMO of Boots. And this went to the C-suite in their company. So it's huge, Boots Walgreen. That they didn't call it addressability, they called it mass personalisation, which is a really interesting description because and it literally was reporting into the CEO, CFO about, because, you know, they're a retailer, they've got thousands of brands. How can they address advertising to known consumers, because they've got consumer data, to actually uplift and drive levels of response? And it's a long process. I mean, you know, she's left now, but it was a long process. It was a big project right at the top of the business. And I think this is what smart companies are starting to look at, because I think the thing about data is, for me, is really interesting, is that there are two kinds. There's kind of what I would call almost like data that's generated from the activity that you can look at, and you can look at audience levels, whatever. But there's also, what's really important is the audience segmentation data at the beginning. So how do you profile the audience? How valuable are they? How do you, I mean, we work with CACI, we have a contract with them, so you can actually split down the whole of the UK by postcode and work out which sectors are most important for brands. Because what we're used to with linear is dealing with mass audiences. And the opportunity with Addressable, and I completely agree, it's a mixed economy. It will be a mixed economy going forwards. But where I see Addressable working, most importantly, is that there's the top of the funnel kind of element, which is really important. That's probably going to be linear, and that's going to be quite broadcast and whatever. What Addressable can do is to work within the middle sector about how we can actually change kind of attitude and preference amongst specific groups of consumers who want that information. They may well have opted into it. So we'll actually then be able to address specific messaging to those people. But that will take a different content strategy as well, which is why it is complicated. You know, we've got to kind of almost rethink the whole industry, I think.
Don't disagree. I think relevancy is really, really important.
Yeah.
But you spoke about some of that use case specifically. For both of you, on the agency side, tell a little bit about the use cases that are most applicable, at least ones that you're being asked of the most when it comes to addressability.
Yeah, shall I go first? I just want to address quickly the point about mass personalisation and just sort of, I'm not necessarily disagreeing with what you're saying, but I think we just need to be mindful of the creepiness factor within that too, especially when we're talking about TV. I think sometimes personalising messaging is good, but just because we can doesn't mean that we should, and we just need to be a bit mindful of what that might translate into for the consumer sometimes. But going back to your point about some of the use cases,
Yeah.
I mean, we've got quite a varied suite of use cases, from the kind of more mass approach, so where we can use addressable channels to drive incrementality. That's kind of been the most traditional use case, I guess, but over time, the way that we do that has evolved, using more sophisticated data sets, and more recently, we've been working with a lot of auto-content recognition partners to identify on an individual campaign basis who has seen our advertising, and then using geography as the identifier of people who haven't seen our advertising, and then serving out ads accordingly, so that we're driving incrementality. So that's sort of been quite a successful use case that we've seen deployed across a few advertisers. And on the flip of that, we've got instances where we are building much more niche audiences, or using first-party data. I think someone spoke to that point earlier. I mean, that's a great use case for addressable, where first-party data is available. So another of our clients, it's an entertainment client. I suppose I could probably say who it is. It's Merlin. They wanted to increase the number of families going to Blackpool as an entertainment venue. So it doesn't just exist. Oh, you've been? Brilliant.
It works.
I did, but because we were targeting people within the Blackpool region. But we're also able to layer on first-party data about families who have visited Blackpool in the last 2 years, and kind of retarget off that basis. And that has been hugely successful at kind of driving more people to Blackpool to go on the roller coasters. Like a few different use cases. We've also worked with lots of different data partners just to identify kind of more bespoke audiences. Trying to think of a seasonal example. We've got Terry's as a client, Terry's Chocolate Orange. Sure you will all be buying those at this time of year. Obviously Christmas, key kind of sales period for chocolate and Terry's. They work with dunnhumby data to identify people who have a high propensity to buy chocolate in supermarkets and retarget off the back of that. So again, kind of just finessing the audience to make sure they're driving sales of potentially the people who are most likely to buy chocolate.
Well, it's, an interesting one. Maybe not everybody, but most people buy chocolate. Yeah. It's about how do you fine-tune that in the right period.
Exactly.
And then there's choice. And so how do you influence at that moment of purchase?
Yeah, there's choice, but there isn't infinite budget. So
right.
It's just about finding the audience at the right point in time.
It's a good use case. And then how about on your side?
I was going to say, to add to that, yeah, we've definitely done a lot on geospaces, first-party data as well. But I think probably one of the main things has been the retailer data, especially if it's a client that maybe doesn't have their own first-party data or doesn't have much, being able to, or potentially that their product actually is something that they don't want to mass reach. You know, it could be, as an example, if it's a beauty product that is tailored specifically to those with curly hair, you know, actually there is a very specific audience that they want to go after, and having that capability to be able to use retailer data to say, Boots or Superdrug, yeah, we've seen these people have bought this product already or bought similar within the category, I think has been quite beneficial to them to be able to really hone in on their target audiences. And I guess also particularly, again, if it's a client that doesn't have maybe that much first-party data and is maybe more of kind of a consumer goods brand as well, being able to reach those audiences that have potentially lapsed and they were buying from them, but maybe they haven't now, so having that capability to be able to target. And yeah, I guess one of the most interesting things we've probably seen from the use cases is also understanding maybe a bit more about our audiences. So from things like with dunnhumby or Nectar, having that capability to understand the potential out-of-category audiences that maybe when we were looking at previously in Addressable we weren't going after, but actually there are the potential to sell to those people because they're already in maybe a confectionery audience when you're looking at frozen goods or something like that, and actually being able to cross-match those audiences, and I guess then also build scale if you are using that data. So that's been quite an interesting use case, I think, for us.
That's great. I think it's two sides of the equation, right? It's creating the audiences. We'll talk a little bit about that more and some challenges with that. But you need to match it to something. You need to match it to someone who is consuming content. So I'm going to go back to both of you. Mm-hmm. How valuable, and I think kind of can go around the room, but I find the programmer, distributor, publisher data to be such a valuable linkage, right? That's who you're attracting. That's who is watching your content. How valuable or how much emphasis do you play in putting that, whether it be on the contextual front or working with agencies and brands, to make sure you're connecting that in the most efficient and effective way? We heard the complexity already, so it's not easy. But where do you both sit on that?
Yeah, well, you mentioned earlier the value of first-party data, and I think certainly at ITV we put a huge amount of emphasis on our registration data for services like ITVX. We have 40 million registered users in the UK, and we can use the data points that they give us during the registration process to also work with third parties to augment the data set further. So actually we do a lot of work with Group M on how do we combine data from retail media, how do we combine data from, MasterCard is a really good example, purchase insights. We work with Experian. We have a couple of partnerships coming up next year, which I don't think I'm allowed to talk about, but Jay down here probably will grab some people afterwards.
I know Jay.
Yes, yeah. But yeah, so we actually put quite a lot of work behind the scenes into how can we take a data set that we think is already very valuable, but then build that out even further in a way that we still think is a reasonable value exchange for the user. Because ultimately, this is all about somebody is entrusting us with their data, and how can we make sure that we are respecting that whilst also driving value. But yeah, it's looking at more innovative ways to kind of harness the power of that first-party data.
To add to that, a couple of things and thoughts. I think first of all, I want to mention one thing. With the technology evolution that we're currently seeing, I think it's a lot easier to build the fitting creative, which is the game changer in the whole thing as well. Because in the past, it was really difficult to create one TV spot was like 150, 200,000 pounds. Right now, it's like in a matter of a second, you can produce 500 different clips that just work with different kind of information. So that's the one thing. The second thing I really want to vote for is like looking into the quality and the type of the content that you're addressing. And I think this tells us a lot beyond the data that we're talking about, but it tells us a lot about the users behind it and the viewers behind it. Take, for instance, if you're up on the couch watching a movie in the evening, it's a completely different setup than if you just watch a highlight clip from a football match from last night, which you might do in the bus. You're in a completely different environment. You might do it on a mobile phone. So I think that's something I want to add to the equation beyond the pure kind of planning aspect, is to look at what is the content. And it goes beyond the contextual piece, because context means, okay, this is a movie, and in the movie there's a car, so I put in my Mercedes commercial at that point, right? But it's really about what's the environment and the mindset of the users and the viewers behind it that we have to not forget. And this is something that machines and data cannot solve. And this is one of the reasons why we have these agencies. And I want to just vote for not to forget that, and not to forget that even though the guy might take the decision of buying the family car, it might be the woman and the wife in the family. I'm sorry, I'm going to these gender role models, but just to give you an example, who's saying, I just don't like BMW, right? It can't be BMW. And even though like you might love BMW, you will take a decision that goes beyond buying a BMW in the end. So, and we do forget that when we just think about the pure data and it has to fit. And I think this context quality is an important piece we should add to the equation, and the human piece of like what we all do, and then the smart kind of minds that go behind it.
Love it. I mean, and I love the simplicity of, I have a curly hair product, I'd like to sell it to curly-haired people.
None of us, I guess, right?
Fairly simple, although the work that goes into just planning that is pretty extensive, let alone buying it. And a lot of that has to do with some challenge. I'm going to throw it to you, Charlie. Identity is not an easy thing.
No.
And certainly when we look at it from a regulatory perspective, we have to be sensitive. And I'm with you, which is there's a creepy factor. Like, oh, you can do it, but there's something about it that could really have a negative impact on a brand, for sure. So talk to me a little bit about some of the challenges you think on the identity front.
I mean, it is difficult. It's highly regulated, and I agree with Emma. I think it should be. You know, you can, if you're intrusive, you're going to...
Don't disagree.
Upset audiences. And the way we think about Addressable is not one-to-one. It's not direct marketing. It's one to a known few. So you're not saying, you know, here's a message for Charlie Makin. You're saying, I know you like, you know, guitars or rock music, whatever. Here's a message that is appropriate for what you might be thinking of. And a lot of the data we've seen today is saying, you know, if advertising is contextually targeted and appropriate to the audience, it has a far greater effect. So I think that's what we're doing. A lot of the data we have, and when I'm talking about first-party data, is usually postcode data with some kind of, ideally, a value level attached to it. So it's non-PII data. We can analyse it. We can run it through systems. And but I think the principle is, you're not trying to chase people. I mean, you know, like in the way that happens online, where, you know, you get chased round sites and served, you know, you think, well, I just had a conversation with my mate in the pub about BMW, and suddenly my phone's inundated with messages about it. What I'm not advocating is we do that. The important thing is understanding the audiences, and more importantly is how valuable they are. Because we see this often, that, you know, you've got... And the other thing is it varies hugely around the country. And one of the things we use quite often is a lot of census data. You know, 13% of people in the UK were born outside of the UK. 43% of people in London were. I mean, it's a vast difference. And the point we would make is that any brand who is looking at a national strategy needs to think about London differently. Because it's not the same as you know, you've got, you know, almost 1 in 2 people in London wasn't born in this country. So they don't understand the kind of cultural mores or brands or history. We've got to think about how you talk to people differently and build that into... So that's kind of what I'm saying. It's not, what we're not trying to do is chase people. What we're trying to do is actually more we're trying to say we need to understand people. And the idea about, sort of, I suppose, in the past where we talked about we're going to target ABC1 adults or whatever, which is just, you know, a mass group of people. What we're saying is actually, can we understand the audiences we're trying to reach, work out what levers will work with them and how you influence them. And to do that, you don't need to get into personal data. There is a level of data you need to do, but I think we can stand back to do that. And the whole thing is a test and learn process. You just get more and more information, and you understand what works, what doesn't work, And then you build up a strategy.
Well, I mean, let's say the test and learn is critical, no question about it. So reporting, I'm not even going to go down measurement for a second, but just reporting.
Yeah.
What do you want back? What do your clients want back for insights into how their campaigns performed?
Quite a lot of it, the stuff we will get is, and we do obviously do a lot of work with Sky and AdSmart, is we'll get tracking surveys and data that they will have commissioned on behalf of the clients, which will show how campaigns worked, who reacted to them, who didn't react to them. And quite often is also getting data back from clients actually to see what uplifted.
Yeah.
Running tests, seeing which audiences performed well. And we often, the other thing which is important about it is we often get surprised, and I think that's really important. You know, suddenly, what's happening with that group of people? Why they were active? And that's what builds that knowledge. And I think it's just having greater, I mean, because we've got the capability to have greater insight, it's using that. Because we've had the data, you know, AdSmart, as Jeff was saying, it's been, and I think it's 10 years old. More than 10 years old. So we've had it for a long time.
No, I know.
It's just being able to, you know, it's just how do you use it and create new experiences for customers.
Well, I mean, you brought up a good point, which is this custom research kind of validation on the back end. Both of you, you know, you're being asked for it, you're asking for it. What is most important to you, or does it change every time when you think about, it's an end of a campaign, we did an addressable campaign. I can't tell you if it drove sales lift because you don't tell me that data. But here's what I learned. You know, maybe any of you talk a little bit about kind of how that third-party research helps to further validate a CPM, increase targeting, even contextual or geo for that matter.
I think what's really interesting about what we're able to do now in understanding what's working, what's not working, is if we're using postcode data or geography as an identifier, is if you think back to the olden days where you do test and learn, and you'd single out an ITV region like Tyne Tees or somewhere obscure like that, and you'd switch it off and do your test and learn. But there would be anomalies because, I don't know, people in Tyne Tees more like to buy Terry's chocolate orange, I don't know. But now we can do the randomised A/B testing at a postcode level and exclude some of the variables that we would have to account for in the past, which means that it doesn't really matter what we're measuring, as long as we can get that data back at a postcode level, we can still do the analysis. So be it brand uplift, be it sales, intent, whatever, you know, we might be doing canton measurement, whatever it is, if we can get it back at a postcode level, then we can conduct what I think is much fairer kind of A/B testing than potentially we've been able to do in the past.
That's a good example.
Using geography, using postcode data as the kind of identifier has been a real success.
Anybody else?
Yeah, I was going to say, I'd agree with that. I think it does depend on what the client wants or even kind of the job to be done for the campaign. But almost any insight they're happy with, I think, because it's like, yeah.
You heard that.
I think because they're so interested in, or they have a set view of potentially who their audience is, anything that then either reaffirms that or potentially contradicts it is interesting either way. So I think that is probably the most interesting thing for our clients is being able to just share back. Actually, you thought your target audience was maybe even as simple as this age group, but actually what we've seen is it's this age group, or same for like the content that you're targeting, like genre-wise. We thought it was going to be this. Actually, we've seen a higher uplift when we've done like a geo lift or anything like that in this area instead. And I think that just helps build a wider picture for the client of who their potential audience could be. It does then bring that argument of, okay, but actually would it have been more beneficial then to have done a mass reach campaign where we're potentially reaching everybody anyways if you've maybe not achieved.
But even on your front, I mean, I totally get that, because on the flip side of it, it's, you know, the sales side coming back to you say, hey, listen, I know what we targeted, but you also have these other spheres of audiences that sit within them, cohorts, if you will.
Yeah, exactly.
We have a lot of those. Let me show you. I mean, do you...
Yeah, and it is, you know, very much what you've said. I think we're not getting necessarily a consistent set of requests as to exactly what people want to see from us. But I think what media owners and broadcast have to do is be open to exploring all of these avenues with our partners and our clients. And I know, ITV is by no means the only one, but more and more broadcasters now are investing in measurement innovation teams, in teams whose sole focus is, we don't have this one standard of measurement, but can we collectively agree something that fits for now until we reach a point that we have something that we feel is perfect?
To add to that, I would say I would really hope for reducing complexity and making the measurements comparable.
Yes.
For instance, in Germany, we consider CTV as being digital video. Right? So we just count one person. Now, if I watch a music video on Vivo via YouTube, it's considered digital. It's measured just as a single view, whereas on television, we say, hey, usually an average on television set, there's 1.6
co-viewing,
watching. So this is something that doesn't relate, and it doesn't make it comparable. So you have to reduce this complexity. We can be pretty certain that if you watch it on a mobile phone, it's probably going to be just a one-to-one consumption. But beyond that, I think you really have to make things comparable. And this is something where we still struggle, where the broadcasters need to work with the platforms, with the tech providers, with the smart TV industry to really, build this common ground of understanding to have the same measurements.
I love that. Now, we've made progress. I think everyone would argue that, certainly over the years, since the days of AdSmart to kind of where we are today. And it's always the year of addressable. So if you could go quickly, what do we need next year? What do you hope for next year? That maybe tease up 2026, but quickly, what are your asks?
Well, we went, unfortunately, it was virtually to the. In the US, there's and you'll know about this. There's a trade body called Addressable.
I do.
Which we attended the conference. Unfortunately, we didn't go to New York. But Addressable in the US they're forecasting next year is going to be $13 billion, which is about, my maths may be wrong, because I think that the total market is flatlining out there. It's about 22.5% of all spend. And it's increased, at 65% of clients included Addressable in their upfront negotiations. So I think we need Addressable here, because I think that's a game changer.
I can help.
Well, it's my view. I think if there's one thing that came out of today, it's creating something like that, because what it seems to be is talking about this thing, it simplifies it. They talk about case studies, they talk about how you use data collectively, how people kind of try to reach standards which are similar in terms of, so you're not having everybody with a different ball garden, you're trying to build a cohesive argument. And, I may be wrong here, because UK TV spend is declining. In the States, it's marginally growing. And I think the difference in that might be a lot of new clients coming in to test Addressable. There was a lot of the stuff that came through that conference was people saying that they're getting new clients. Clients are coming to them with first-party data saying, can we use this?
Yeah, a lot of the small business starts coming into TV, one for the scale and reach that it has.
But I think it's quite difficult over here to do it at the moment. But I think creating something like
that's interesting.
Here.
That's a good one. I'll take that one as an action for next year. Anybody else, quickly? I do have one last question I want to ask before.
Yeah, my wish list is definitely to make the data accessible for everyone on an anonymous level. But still, I think you have to leave your walled gardens of being Netflix, being Disney, being Amazon, being a broadcaster, and make it accessible to really build a data set that applies for everyone out there.
Yeah. And similar vein, I think my wish is that we actually get better at solving for Addressable in the mix of the wider ecosystem. So what does convergence of your addressable buyers, your linear buyers, how do we simplify that?
That is a good one.
I'll take it one step further and say actually beyond just video as well, because most media can now be bought addressably.
That's true, yeah.
Yeah, I think just to add to all of that, again, I'm probably coming from a biased point of view because my entire job is measurement, but being able to measure the value of that addressable as well and understanding, I guess, that media mix of where should we be using it, where shouldn't we, how do we then do that cross partners rather than just looking at the kind of singularity of we can measure the incrementality or the uplift of having used it in one place.
I love it. So my last question, we are talking about TV. We're going to go have a drink after, and this will be an icebreaker for whoever comes up and says hello to you. What's your favorite show that you watched this year?
I'm a massive Real Housewives fan. So
all right, I like it.
Any Real Housewife. I don't discriminate. Beverly Hills, Cheshire. I'm here for it.
Passion, I love it. How about you?
I think all ITV employees are contractually obliged to say Vista Bates versus the post office at this point.
It's the same here. The other one I loved was Sky made us Lee, the film about the Second World War photographer Lee Miller, which Kate Winslet was in, and it was her passion project, and it was just brilliant. I mean, it just shows the power of what TV can do.
Don't disagree.
First of all, before I answer the question, I want to say thank you to everyone. I learned this is called the graveyard panel, that everyone's hanging out with us. And, skipping the drinks for now. So thank you for that one.
I was excited.
Apart from that, answering the question, mine was The Last 12 Days from Roger Federer. I really thoroughly enjoyed it. I thought it was very deep. It showed the professionalism behind the sports guy, what a lovely, humble person he is, and I really very much enjoyed that show.
I guess, like, for me, don't shoot me, but I don't watch a lot of linear TV. Mine is definitely more of the SVOD platform, so I very much enjoyed Rivals this year.
Yeah, I know it. Well, thank you, everybody. We are out of time.
What was your show?
Shrinking on SVOD. It is on Apple TV. It is awesome. Amazing show. I think it's called Shrinking, something like that. But it's very, very good. So I recommend it. But thank you, everybody, for joining us. Thank you for just speaking candidly. And go buy some chocolate.